then you are in the right place. We are going to be here until about 1 p.m. We might end a little early depending on how things are going, but we're excited to have you here today. All of the trainings that we bring to you through the Community Health Training Institute are brought to you absolutely free, thanks to the generous funding that we receive through the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. So there are a couple things that we want to do before we officially get started and introduce the team and get into the content for today. One of the things being, if you need to adjust your name on the screen, we just want to make sure that it's reflective of how you want to be called today. And we also, if you are able and willing, we'd love for you to add your pronouns to your name as well. And the way that you can do that is if you hover over your video screen or the box that says your name, there are 3 little dots on the right-hand corner of your screen. And if you click them, you should get the option to rename in your drop-down box. So if you can take some time to do that now, we would really appreciate it. We just want to make sure that we're addressing folks by the right name and pronouns throughout the training. So we would love if you could take the time to do that now. And if you have any issues or you don't quite understand, please feel free to let us know or drop some comments or questions in the chat box as well. A little bit of Zoom overview as we jump into today as well. For those of you, I see folks renaming themselves, adding their pronouns to their names, which we love to see. I know some of you are very, very familiar with Zoom. We've been doing this for over a year now, but also don't want to make any assumptions. So you are going to get very familiar with the bottom bar or the bottom menu on your Zoom screen. It's housed all your controls and a lot of the buttons that we're going to be using today. So we will be asking you to unmute yourself to join the conversation, ask questions, share your experiences. And you can do that by clicking the mute and unmute button to share your voice. You can do the same with the video. You can share your video or stop your video, however you see fit. We love to see faces. So if you are ready and willing to share your camera, that's awesome. If you choose not to, that's also okay as well. Just want to know that that's an option for you all. We also will be doing breakout rooms, which means we'll be putting you in small groups to have conversations and do some activities. So that's another space that you're welcome to unmute yourself, jump into the conversation, and also share your camera. If you don't feel comfortable doing it in the large group, you're welcome to do it in the small group as well. The other button on the bottom bar of your menu that you'll probably see and notice is the chat box. And you might have already seen that there are folks typing in the chat box. Tonight I'll drop the instructions for how to rename yourself and add your pronouns to your screen, which is wonderful. And I'm going to ask you all to actually type in the chat box now. We want you to share your name, where you're coming from, and what brought you to registering for this training. So if you can kind of share who you are, the role or the hat that you wear, and what brought you to register for this training, that would be wonderful. So we can get to know who's in the space. Looks like we currently have about 37 people in the room, which is wonderful. And I imagine that we'll get a couple stragglers join us as we get started as well. So if you can take a couple minutes to jump into the chat box and share with us who you are and what brought you to this training, that would be wonderful. All right, these are coming in. Ooh, a couple folks from Needham. Some Lawrence friends. Thank you so much for adding these in the chat box. This is great. Yeah, folks are jumping into advocacy work as part of a new strategic plan, doing some policy work. Ooh, some of your new work involves creating info packets for legislators. Some of that work is happening in Watertown. Ooh, Gardner. I'm in Central Mass. I'm in the Worcester, Auburn area. So hello to all my Central Mass friends. Awesome. Hoping to learn more about how our organization can support advocacy work in our community. This is great. Springfield, Western Mass in the house. This is great. Awesome. So thank you all. Please keep dropping them in the chat box. We love to see where folks are coming from, what you're hoping to get out of today, or what brought you to this space. So as you continue to do that, I am going to ask our trainer, Alexis, to say hello and introduce herself as we get to know who's in this room.
Yeah. So hi, everybody. It's so good to see your faces and to see everybody sort of typing into the chat where they're coming from. I love seeing all the substance use prevention folks in the house because that's the work that I used to do before I moved on to work with the Massachusetts Public Health Association. But I will just say, my name is Alexis. I work with the Massachusetts Public Health Association. I use she, her pronouns. And I am here today to talk to you about legislative policy advocacy. For those who don't know, MPHA is a statewide nonprofit that does public health policy advocacy, and our work really runs the gambit. I would say a big focal point of our work more recently has been thinking about, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic and what recovery looks like. We've done a lot of work around local public health infrastructure, transportation equity. And so I'm really excited to have conversations with you all today about the legislative process and when and where it makes sense for you all to get involved as advocates. And I'm grateful for HRIA for wanting to do this training with us. So thanks, Gina.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alexis. And then I'm going to ask my team to say hello and introduce themselves so you kind of know who's running the back end and here to support you if you run into any issues. So I'll hand it over to Kelly to say hello.
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all here today. My name is Kelly Dankert. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the training associate for the Community Health Training Institute. I've been on this team for about 5 years, and so I recognize a lot of familiar faces and names in the room. So really excited to be here and talk more about the legislative process with you all. And with that, I'll pass it over to our other teammate, Tanayo.
Thanks, Kelly. Good morning, everyone. My name is Tanayo Crow, she, her pronouns. I'm the administrative coordinator for the Community Health Training Institute. I've been on the project for almost 3 years, so I've just been rounding up for the last few months. And I'm really excited to be here with you all this morning and learn some new things. So I think, Gina, we're moving into an icebreaker.
We are, and I wanted to give you a little bit of background information about the Community Health Training Institute, especially in terms of where we are today, what's happening, what's going on, just to give you a little information and a little peek into what we have on deck for the next coming year. So this is the last training of our fiscal year. Yay, we're so excited. The Community Health Training Institute is a project partnership between Health Resources in Action and the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. And the project itself has been around for about 9-10 years now. We've been on it for the last few years. Kelly shared that she's been on the project been around for about 5 years. And we actually started around the same time. So I've got 5 years in on the Community Health Training Institute as well. And because of that partnership that we have with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, we were able to create a relationship with MPHA. So we have a history over the last few years of them doing this type of training, really working with and supporting coalition and community work across the state and thinking and helping organizations think through how to be a part of the legislative process. What does advocacy look like? What does policy work look like connected to the work that you all are doing? So we've done trainings on all different types of topics, and we're really excited to be working with Alexis this year to bring you what we're hoping that you'll really enjoy and take a lot of for today. And let you know that we are sort of in the midst of planning for our next fiscal year, for a year full of wonderful trainings. As of right now, most of our trainings are slated to continue to be online as we try to figure out what this life looks like. during a pandemic, and fingers crossed that things start to trend towards doing stuff in person. But for right now, we are planning to do online trainings, but all of the wonderful things that we've done in the past will sort of come up for this next fiscal year. So we're continuing to do our community building trainings, our facilitation trainings, and really would love to hear from you all. What you'll notice is that at the end of the training, we'll give you a feedback form. If there are any training topics or things that you're interested in looking for, we would love to hear from you all around what you think would be supportive of the work that you're doing across the communities that you're working in. We really love all of your feedback and really take that into consideration as we're putting together our calendar and our plan for the year. So just wanted to give you some of that background information and let you know to keep your eyes peeled. If you're not already a part of our newsletter, we ask you to visit our website, hrainstitute.org, which will be getting a new facelift very, very soon. So you will see a brand new website very, very shortly. So keep your eyes out peeled for that as well. So I'm going to ask you all to see if you have on the bottom bar of your Zoom screen, there are some buttons, depending on how updated your Zoom is, there are some reaction buttons. There's a little sort of like crying, laughing face. There's a surprise face. There's a heart button. There's a clapping emoji. So I'm going to ask you to just pick one of those buttons at random and give me a reaction just so that I can see how many people have access to those emojis. Wonderful. Look at that. I love it. Great. All right. So this is going to be great for our really quick icebreaker that we're going to do in this space. So I'm going to wait till these kind of fade off. All right. I want you to give me, let's see. Give me a thumbs up emoji if you have gone to at least one other Community Health Training Institute training this past year. So at least one other training. Thumbs up. Ooh, I love it. Look at you. All right. So give me a heart emoji if you've gone to at least 2 to 3 other Community Health Training Institute trainings over the past year. 2 to 3. Heart emoji. Oh, I see you, Karen. I see you, Laura. We love it. And we hope that you can come to the future ones because we're really excited about what we have coming up this year. All right, I want to see a clapping hands emoji if you are in the greater Boston area. Boston or the greater Boston area. Clapping hands emoji. Who's in Boston? Ooh, look at you, Boston folks. I miss the city. I grew up in Boston and then I moved out to Central Mass a few years ago and I miss it. Look at all my Boston friends. All right. What about my friends in the Worcester or Central Mass area? Give me the celebration or the confetti emoji. Let's celebrate some Central Mass love. Hi, Heather. Maybe it's just me and you, Heather. This is the only one that I saw.
Oh, is it just us? Michelle, we got Michelle too.
Oh, there we go. There we go. There's Michelle. What about my Western Mass friends? Give me a thumbs up emoji if you are in the Western Mass area. Mabel and Brian, Jasmine, Laura. I love it. I love the Western Mass friends. All right. Give me a heart emoji if you've had a chance to enjoy the wonderful sunny weather this past weekend. Did you do anything fun? So I want to see heart emojis if you did. And then I want you to drop into the chat box anything that you've done really fun lately so that you can share with our friends. Oh, I love these heart emojis. Yay. I love when we're able to enjoy our lovely funny weather. Fun, sunny, what? I can't speak today, clearly. Ooh, visiting Cape Cod. Ooh, Drumlin Farm. Oh my gosh, I love all these wonderful ideas. My kids are almost out of school, so I'm totally gonna steal some of these. Vaccination block party. That sounds amazing. Jonathan, I need to go to your neighborhood. I wanna go to a vaccination block party. This is awesome. the lake, birthday party in York, Maine. There's a wonderful little zoo up there that I used to take my kids when they were really little. Oh, dinner date with the hubby. This is wonderful. Oh, thank you all. I appreciate it. Thank you for jumping in there. Just wanted to bring some energy into this space. Sometimes it can be really hard when there's so many people to go around and like have everyone say their name and spend a really long time hearing from folks. So we do want to bring you into the space in some way. And we find that sometimes doing things like this is a really cool way to just get to know who's in the room and get to know a little bit about you all. So thank you for sharing that. So I really, really appreciate that. Is there any questions at all before I kick it off to Alexis, or anything that anybody wants to sort of name or ask in the chat box before we officially get started? Give it a few seconds. Awesome. All right, Alexis, I'm going to pass it off. Let me know if I missed anything too. Feel free to jump in.
Thanks so much, Gina. And you know, I love the Zoom emoji activity. I'm totally stealing that as an icebreaker for future meetings. But so hi again, everybody. Alexis, again, I work with Massachusetts Public Health Association. I am our assistant campaign director. And so part of my role is to have conversations just like this one to help build out the advocacy muscles of willing advocates like yourselves. So I'm really excited about our conversation here today. Before I start sharing my screen, I just want to mention a couple of things. I don't have a group agreements or norm slide like I usually would in most meetings, but I just want to say that love to see faces. And so if you all are comfortable taking your, turning your cameras on, great. If you're not, or if you're doing other things, totally understandable. This is a really weird world that we're living in, doing everything virtually. And so I recognize that us having this conversation is like you inviting me into your home. And so if you don't want to turn on your camera, so I'm not seeing what's going on in your home, that's okay too. If at any point you want to eat during this conversation, that's also fine. I even welcome eating on camera. I just ask that if you are going to eat on camera, keep yourself on mute so we don't have to hear you snapping on carrots. That would be really great. And as I said, I love the activity that Gina did, because something that I often ask folks to do is if you hear somebody share something that really resonates with you, to use some sort of sign of appreciation, whether that be like a sign of applause, whether that be, bigging somebody up in the chat, whether that be using a Zoom emoji. So even though we're not in person, we can still show appreciation for the ideas that all of us are bringing to the table. And so I encourage you all to do that. What I will also say about this training is that no one is an expert in this, right? Like we all have differing levels of experience through looking at some of the answers that you all provided within the registration. It's very clear that some of you have a lot of experience working with the legislature. Others have very little experience, and that's okay. That's really great. What I would say is I encourage those who do have experience to share your experiences, whether that be in the chat, whether you want to perhaps raise your hand to share something. And so I definitely want to rely as well on the expertise of others in the room. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can I get some thumbs up if people see what I'm seeing? Do you see this slide that I have up, the agenda and learning objectives slide? Yes, no, maybe? Awesome, perfect. Okay, so let me go ahead and make this a little bit larger. Here we go. Alrighty. So what we're going to be talking about today. So there are three sort of objectives and few things that I want you all to walk away with. One is I would love for you all to be able to walk away and be able to describe the process of how policy is passed in Massachusetts and where there's opportunity for you to get involved as advocates. We would also love for you to be able to identify strategies for engaging with policymakers. And specifically state policymakers. We are talking about legislative advocacy within the state of Massachusetts. I know there might be folks calling in from other places, and there are some skills that are definitely transferable, but I just want to be clear that we are talking about the Massachusetts legislature. And then lastly, I want you all to be able to describe lobbying and identify resources for strategic lobbying. And so that means we're sort of breaking up our training today in three parts. One, we'll talk about the legislative structure. The second is talking about the legislative process. And then the third is talking about legislative engagement. So one framing that I want to introduce to you all that a colleague of mine always uses that I really like is that effective strategic public health advocates, they do 5 things. They get the right information to the right people at the right time, using the right method, and it comes from the right messenger. Alrighty. And so when we talk today, when we talk about legislative structure and we talk about the process and we talk about engagement, we're going to be really honing in on numbers 2 through 4. We will make mention of how to get the right information and who the right messengers are. But I do want to be clear that given everybody is coming from so many different places and work with different types of organizations, we're not necessarily talking about how to build out a campaign here. We're more so talking about how to engage. So this can be useful for someone who is trying to build a coalition and to actually lead their own campaign work. But we also want it to be useful for those who are maybe just an individual who's really interested and who wants to get plugged in and involved. So we will be focusing really on 2 through 4 here today. So let's talk about the first piece, or the second piece rather. So let's say we have the right information and we want to get it to the right people or the right person. The more specific we can be about who it is that we're targeting with our message, the better. And so let's talk a little bit about the state legislature. And so to do this, we are actually going to, we're going to take a step back and think about why the legislature is even important. So I would love for you all to, maybe this is a space where we can use our chat function and just share why the legislature is even important. What are some of the things that our legislature does that you know about? And I'll give folks maybe just a couple of minutes to start putting things in the chat. What do our legislators do? They pass laws, they set the state budget. Thank you, Joe. Yeah, absolutely. What else? They give structure, process, and voice from citizens to create policy. They pass laws and bills. We see budgets. They decide who gets the money. Absolutely, that is definitely something that our legislature does. Any other ideas on things that our legislators do? They ensure those left behind get uplifted. Yeah, ideally so, right, Jonathan? They set the tone for national work. That's absolutely true. That is absolutely true, Megan. Yeah, so you all have put some really great ideas in the chat here. Our legislators do quite a few things, right? You all already are on the money. They discuss and vote on proposed laws. So that's absolutely huge because those laws shape the environment in which we live. They approve the state budget annually, which is really important. They establish the courts. They have some oversight over state agencies. So I don't know if folks remember earlier this spring when we were having conversations about how the COVID-19 vaccine should be distributed, the legislature held a hearing, an oversight hearing to ask the executive branch questions about how this was being done because they wanted to hold them accountable, right? So they definitely have some oversight over state agencies. The legislature can override the governor's veto with a 2/3 vote. And they also perform services for their constituents and work with cities and towns within their district. So yes, a lot of the work that they do is statewide, but they also do work that is very specific to their district. And so as you all, it seems already knew, I mean, as we can see here, the legislature does a lot of work that has really broad impacts. And so it's really important for us as advocates to know how this body works and how to engage with it, because if we have influence over the legislature, we have influence over a lot of things, right? And so I'm curious to know, and this can be something that that you all either drop in the chat, or maybe we could even take a couple of people if folks want to raise their hands to share. For those who have contacted their legislator or interacted with their legislator, can you share what that interaction was about? What did you contact your legislator about? And how did you contact them? Okay, so Margaret says, send them our annual report, invite them to key events. Megan says tobacco retailer restrictions. Kelly says that she emailed her legislator requesting support for budget and advocacy for early intervention. Camille is saying that she contacted her legislator about co-sponsoring a bill or sponsoring a bill about medical nutrition therapy. Wow. So this is real. This is great. Has anybody out of curiosity contacted their legislator about something that wasn't necessarily a statewide issue, but an issue specific to your city or town? And if not, that's okay. I'm just curious. Okay. Kelly says attending a meet and greet in Boston to discuss, and I think it cut off a little bit, to discuss something important, I'm sure.
It's early intervention.
Thanks, Kelly. Jonathan says a roundtable and accountability is huge with our delegation so we can communicate closely with them. Absolutely. That's definitely a way to hold your legislators accountable. All right. So again, it seems like we have a lot of experience in the room, which is great, which is why I would, again, encourage folks to share their experience as we go along here today. Okay, so what we're actually going to do is we are going to break down the legislature a little bit more, and we're just going to answer, we're going to go back to the basics, right? What is the structure of the legislature? How is it set up? And what are sort of the rhythms of the legislature in Massachusetts? And so what we're going to do in a bit, but not yet, is our team from HRIA is going to pull up a poll, and the poll is going to have, I think it's either 4 or 5 questions for you about the legislature. And what you all are going to do is you're just going to go through and answer all the questions to the best of your ability. I was doing this with a group of high schoolers not too long ago, and it doesn't surprise me that many of them sometimes know this a lot better than we do because it's something that they're closer to in learning. So answer to the best of your ability, and it's a-okay if we don't know all the answers because we're going to talk about it. So perfect. The poll is up right now. I'm just going to read through the questions and you all can start answering now if you would like. So the first question we have is, how many state reps do we have in Massachusetts? Our second question is, how many state senators do we have in Massachusetts? The third question is, how long is a legislator's term? The fourth is, how often do our legislators meet? And then the fifth is, what is the average base salary for a Massachusetts legislator? All right, so we're going to give you all just a couple of minutes to start answering these questions. All right, so we have some folks who are answering. We still have about maybe half the group who hasn't submitted an answer yet. All right, so we're having folks continue to answer. I think I saw in the chat that someone's having a difficult time accessing the poll. Penelope, it should pop up on your screen for you to see, but maybe someone can help you with that. Oh, there we go. Kelly's already on it. All right, so maybe let's give 30 more seconds for folks to answer. All right, so we're going to end polling now. Cool, thank you. All right, so let's see how you all answered these. So I'm gonna go through how folks answered, and then we're gonna go through the correct answers, okay? So for how many state reps we have in Massachusetts, most people answered, or half of the group answered 160, and that, yep, sorry, I'm gonna keep going. So yes, most of you answered 160. For how many state senators we have, most of you answered 55. For how long a legislator's term is, most people answered 2 years. For how often our legislators meet, most people said 9 months out of the year in 2-year sessions. And lastly, for what is the average base salary, we were sort of tied between 62,500 and 74 or 75,000. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing these results, and we're going to see what the answers truly are. All right. So we're starting with the first question. How many state reps do we have? The correct answer is 160. So most of you were right. That's about one state rep per 40,000 constituents. All right. When it comes to how many state senators we have in Massachusetts, there are a lot fewer senators than there are state house reps. And so we have 40 state senators. So not 55, but we have 40 state senators in Massachusetts. That's about 1 per 160,000 constituents. How long is a legislator's term? You all were correct in that the term is 2 years. The one thing I will say about this is even though a term is 2 years, many of our legislators serve longer than 2 terms, so because they run for re-election. And in fact, in both our primary and general elections within Massachusetts, most incumbents run unopposed. And so you'll often see a legislator having served for years and years and years. And just to be clear, their term is 2 years, but it's often because they will run for re-election. And the term is the same for legislators across the board. How often do our legislators meet? Year round, actually, in 2-year sessions. So I think most folks had answered 9 months in 2-year sessions, but we actually in Massachusetts are really fortunate to have full-time legislators, which means that we have more access to our legislators, which is fantastic. And so a term, or a session rather, will typically start on the odd year. And so we actually have a session that started in January of this year. So the session that we're in right now started in January of 2021, and it will go until December of 2022, so next winter. And then lastly, what is the average base salary for a Massachusetts legislator? It is $62,547. Now, granted, as we mentioned, this is base salary. So the more time someone serves, and also when a legislator takes on leadership roles, you are paid more for that. So we're just talking about the average base salary for a legislator. So I'm going to pause there and see if anybody has any questions before we move into actually digging in to learn about who our legislators are. Okay. All righty. Oh, actually, before that, let's talk about power. This is actually really important. So who actually holds the power? There are a couple of reasons why I want to talk to you all quickly about this. So some of you may notice the Mean Girls image that's kind of like on this slide. And that's because oftentimes the legislature really is kind of like high school or school, where you have the popular kids who are making decisions that shape just like general culture or how things run. We often see that within the legislature. Even though every legislator has a vote, there is only a core group of legislators who are actually deciding what comes to a vote. So everybody may have a vote, but there's a core group who's actually deciding what gets to come to a vote, what is brought to a vote or not. And so when we look at how that power is distributed within the legislature, I just want to name a few things. And the reason I want to name some of these titles or just these general power structures is because when you are directing a message to the legislature and you're trying to influence the legislature, you can't just put out a message that's generally directed towards everybody, right? You want an understanding of who actually has the power within the legislature, who specifically has the power to give you what you want, and you want to be as specific as possible in targeting your message towards that person. And so in the House, a couple of titles that I want you to be familiar with are Speaker of the House and Majority Leader. These are two top dogs within the House who often have the power to shape the agenda for the House, who shape the scheduling and whether bills are actually being brought to the floor for a vote. So these two have a lot of power, especially the Speaker of the House. The Speaker of the House is the top dog within the House. Within the Senate, we have our Senate President and Majority Leader. Similar to the Speaker, the Senate President also has a lot of power to shape the agenda, to shape the flow of legislation, what is actually being brought to a vote. And so when we talk about top dogs in the House and Senate, those are two positions that are really important to know. It's also really important as you all do research on your own legislators, to know if you have a legislator in one of these positions, because if you do, that means you especially have a lot of power and want to be sure that you're targeting your advocacy towards those individuals. Another power structure I want you to be aware of are committees. So committees are essentially these groups of legislators who come together to review bills that are specific to different topics. And each committee has its own chair and vice chair. So there are leadership positions within each committee. There are some committees that have more power than others. So one that you all might be familiar with and that you might especially hear about around budget season are our House and Senate Ways and Means chairs and House and Senate Ways and Means committees. These are committees that determine that write the first draft for how money is going to be spent in Massachusetts. And these are the groups where when we are doing our budget advocacy, it's oftentimes the chair and the vice chair of Ways and Means that we're directing our messaging towards. And lastly, the other I would say entity that holds a lot of power is you, the constituent. The constituent is incredibly important because, as some folks already named earlier, the constituents are the ones who are actually electing these folks to power. And so for that reason, legislators have incentive to listen to constituents. I would also just say that constituents have access to information that legislators need. So we mentioned earlier that our legislators in Massachusetts are full-time, and that's absolutely true, but legislators and their staff can't be experts in everything, right? And they can't be connected to every single community. And so they rely upon constituents, active constituents, to provide information around issues and how it's impacting constituents, and to provide information on how certain policies are going to either benefit or harm communities. And so you all as constituents have a lot of power. I think we have, 30 some people on this call right now. Many of us live in different districts. That means there's a lot of power in this room alone, in this Zoom room. One note on committees, I just want to sort of provide a list so that you all can sort of see. There are several committees. This is just a short list. This is not fully inclusive, but you can see we have committees ranging from subjects or topics like housing to labor and workforce development, to education, to public health, right? So there are several different committees, and our committees sometimes change. So as issues become more and more important and more relevant, and we see more bills specific to different issues, new committees might arise. So examples of two new committees that were recently introduced this current legislative session were the COVID-19 and Emergency Preparedness and Management Committee, and also the Joint Committee on Racial Equity, Civil Rights, and Inclusion. Does anyone have any questions about who holds power before we move on to the next piece? Yeah, so Thank you. So we have a couple of questions here. So someone asked the role of the minority party. So that's a really good question. It honestly, it sometimes depends on how big the minority party is in a state. We know that Massachusetts is overwhelmingly a pretty blue state. So there are not as many Republicans as there are Democrats within the Massachusetts legislature. However, I will say that the minority party certainly has leadership positions. So just like there's a majority leader in the House and Senate, there are also minority leaders. So folks who are sort of spokespeople for the party that may not be in the majority within a chamber. And I will also say that when it comes to certain decisions, so actually I'll provide an example when thinking about like the Senate budget process, right? We are currently in the conference committee process, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and that's where the House and Senate sort of resolve their differences. When deciding who the conferees are going to be, so like who the leaders from the House and Senate are going to be to make decisions around, what is actually going to be included or not included in the final budget, we oftentimes have to assign somebody from the minority party to be a part of those conversations to make sure that that voice is being heard as well. So there are often rules to ensure that in certain decision-making processes, a voice from the minority party is present. So that's a really good question, Joe. And then I see that Megan asked, how are they elected into those positions? It's by the chamber. So the House will decide and elect who will be the Speaker of the House. The Senate will decide who will be the Senate President. And then the person who's in that leadership role will actually determine who is elected into all of the other leadership positions within the House and within the Senate, which is why the Speaker of the House and the Senate President have a lot of power, because once they're elected into power, they then make decisions on who else is going to be in power. And these slides will definitely be shared. I'm like looking at HRA folks. I'm like pretty sure they're going to be shared. Yes. Cool. All right. So let's talk about your legislators. So I'm curious to know, without looking anything up, do folks in this room know who your legislators are? So thinking about where you live, do you know who your House representative is and who your state senator is? And if you do, please put their names in the chat. All right, so we have Margaret. Margaret's like, I know my legislators. We have Sarah and Jonathan. Nice, nice. All righty, Kathy and Joe and Monica and Gabriella, Lydia. This is beautiful. So it's looking like some of you absolutely know who your legislators are without even having to think about it, which is wonderful. And if you don't know who your legislator is, that's okay too, because we're going to do that right here as a group. And so we are going to go into an activity soon where you'll need this information on who your legislators are. But before we do that, I would love for everybody to visit the website in the chat. And let me actually pop the link in the chat as well. Give me a quick second. So you are going to visit the link that's about to be put in the chat. If you do not know who your legislators are, and you are going to look them up and find out who your legislator is or who your legislators are if you don't already know. In order to find who your legislators are, you're going to go to this website, which is in the chat now, malegislature.gov/search/find-my-legislator. And you're going to enter your street address, your city and town, or town rather, and your zip code. You'll see that the two who are on the screen right now are actually my legislators. I live in the neighborhood of Dorchester in Boston. And so where I live, my House representative is Rep. Liz Miranda, and my state senator is Nick Collins. So I want everybody to just take maybe 2 minutes, if you don't already know who your legislators are, and you are going to look them up online and keep their names in mind. Take note of their names, because again, you're going to need that for our next activity. All right. So can I get thumbs up from folks who now have the information if you have it? If not, that's okay too. I'm just trying to kind of take a pulse and see how many people need more time. All right. So I'm seeing some thumbs up. I'm seeing others without thumbs up. So we're going to give maybe another minute for folks to gather this information. All right. So now that most people likely have this information, I'm going to give instructions for our next activity. So you all now know who your legislators are, and now you're going to try to get to know them a little bit better and do a little internet stalking. And when we do that, there are 4 different questions that I want you to find the answers to. So you can do a little investigating. I want you to find out what your legislator's career background is. I want you to find out how long they've been in office. What are 3 bills that they've recently sponsored? And I want to be intentional here about the language around sponsorship. We're talking about co-sponsorship. We're talking about sponsorship, not co-sponsorship. So when you go to the Massachusetts legislature website and you find your legislators, you're going to see options for viewing bills that they've sponsored and viewing bills that they've co-sponsored. A bill that is sponsored is a bill that your legislator has been a lead filer in. A bill that they've co-sponsored is a bill that one of their colleagues have filed that they've signed on like in support of. So you're going to find bills that they filed, right? And then you're also going to find out whether they are chair or vice chair of a committee and which committee. All right. And so you can find this information in 2 ways. So one is just using the massachusettslegislature.gov website, and I'll put that in the chat as well. That's where you'll be able to find information around bills that they've sponsored and whether they are chair or vice chair of a committee. To find information around career background and how long they've been in office, you can honestly just do a Google search, just search your legislator, and a lot of that information, many of them have their own website, and that information will be pretty evident in their bio section. And so I'm going to put a few things in the chat just so that we have all of this information before we go into breakout rooms. So I'm putting in the chat. Thank you. Oh, y'all are already on it. Look at that. I need to work with the HRA team all the time for any workshop or training. Thank you, Tanayo. So Tanayo has put in the chat the questions that we're answering. And Tanayo's also put in the chat the MassachusettsLegislature.gov website. So those are the things you all are going to be using. In a bit, you all are going to be broken into small groups of like 3 to 4 people. And you're going to be put in groups not necessarily with people who have the same legislator, but it's honestly so you all can like internet stalk in solidarity with one another and kind of discuss the process as you wish. So you're going to be put in small groups. You're going to be answering these questions. HRIA team, does like 15 minutes seem about right? Like, does that feel okay? So we're going to take 15 minutes in our groups. And when we come back, we're going to come back and we're really just going to kind of discuss if you found out anything that was new or surprising to you. So we'll have just a bit of a large group discussion. And then after that, we'll go into our break. All right. Are there any questions that we have before we go into our breakout rooms? Speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, cool. So we can break out whenever the rooms are ready. All right. Cool. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. So as I mentioned, we are going to take a break in just a few minutes. But before we do that, I would just love for folks to share. And since we have a group of a manageable size today, I welcome folks who want to answer the question and take themselves off of mute. But yeah, can you share with us anything new that you learned about your legislators or anything interesting about, digging a little bit deeper and learning more about your legislators?
I can go. I think one of the most interesting things was Marcos Devers is one of mine, and the fact that he taught high school math in Lawrence for 16 years, and then he was the first Dominican American mayor in the entire United States and the first Latino mayor in Massachusetts.
Very cool. Very cool. Thanks for sharing that. That is really interesting. What about you, Mabel?
Yes, Senator Adam Gomez, the first Latino in Western Mass to become a senator. He's been on 1 year, and I actually know him personally. He worked hard for working on COVID infection. He's only been on there, been as a senator 1 year, but he's worked on bills for COVID safety and things like that. My state rep, Bud Williams, I'm surprised. I've known him forever too, but I didn't know he had sponsored internet speed, mental health, COVID-19. He serves on the joint committee for, I forgot what it is, Ways and Means or something. And he, he's on the.
Uh-oh, Mabel, your audio for a second. I think when you turn away from the camera, we can't hear you as well.
Yeah, I'm having trouble with my internet. Anyway, can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, so my state rep, I didn't realize he sponsored all these bills on mental health. I found at least 15 bills and more that he's sponsored. I won't name all of those, but that's going to be helpful because I serve on his Black COVID committee here in Springfield. So I'll be able to share some of that stuff with our committee tomorrow night. Thanks.
Very cool. And also I will say for Senator Gomez, and I'm almost positive this is, I'm thinking about the right senator, was also a huge advocate before he took office. And so I think he did a lot of organizing with Neighbor to Neighbor out in like Western Mass and in the Springfield area. And so he's also an advocate, I think, at heart, which also—
Yes, he is. I've known him since he was a child. So
very cool.
I'm familiar with both of my reps.
Nice.
On a personal level. Thank you.
Cool. Well, it's awesome that somebody who already knows their legislators so well already, we're able to find even more information about them that can kind of help you in your work. So thanks for sharing that, Mabel. Maybe does one more person want to share something that was either interesting or surprising or new that you discovered about your legislators? I see Joe with the raised hand, so why don't we get Joe?
Thank you. No, so we have Bruce Tarr as our state's senator up here, and he's the Senate Minority Leader. So that's kind of interesting because, you know, as you said, there aren't many places where we have Republicans in office, and so he's an attorney by trade, and then he served in the House of Representatives, and then was elected to the Senate in '95 and became the Minority Leader in 2012. And he's, you know, the ranking member in a lot of committees. So there's the redistricting committee, which I didn't realize that he was a part of. And then all these other committees that I hadn't heard of, to be honest with you, like steering and policy, administration and regulatory oversight, export development. There's a lot there that I wasn't aware of. And he also serves on the telecoms, utilities, and energy committee. And that's kind of interesting for us because we're a community action agency and we run a number of energy efficiency programs. So there's a really nice kind of tie in there. And then just as in, you know, our state rep is Ann Margaret Ferrante, and she I didn't realize this, but she's the vice chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, which is
Sure is.
good to have, yeah. But I know
Yep.
that she also used to work for Bruce Tower for years. So although he's a Republican and she's a Democrat, she was his legislative aide for a while. So there's a few interesting things that I wasn't actually aware of in there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would definitely say, to your point, right, when you recognize that your legislator is like pretty high ranking on a certain committee that holds a lot of weight or a lot of influence, again, that's a good thing to have as an advocate. So well, definitely.
I will say one thing that I'd seen a lot on her Facebook recently was she was kind of going around all of the places where she'd gotten earmarks, and she was like, and so I was thinking there were more than usual. So it's really related to the fact that she's on the Ways and Means Committee. So.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Joe. And any other feedback folks want to share, please feel free to drop it in the chat. But I do just want to give us an opportunity to take, maybe we could do a 10-minute break. So yeah, why don't we take a 10-minute break? A couple of us will kind of hang around here. So if there's anything that you want to share, feel free to stay on and we will be able to answer. But yeah, why don't we go ahead and take a 10-minute break, put yourself on mute, turn your camera off, and step away. And Tanaya was kind enough to put a timer in to help us all keep on track. So we will see you all back in 10 minutes. Everybody should be coming back to the Zoom room now. I'm gonna give just maybe like a couple more seconds for people to filter back in.
Alexis.
Yes.
I text my state rep.
You did?
That was cool.
What'd you say, Mabel?
I told him I didn't know he had sponsored all these bills. I can support him even better now. He said, I thought you was already supporting me.
That's great. I love it. I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, okay, thank you.
All right, everybody. So let's get back to it. So we talked about legislative structure, right? And a big part of that is just understanding who we have to get our message to. Because remember, effective strategic public health advocates are getting the right information to the right people, and they have to do it at the right time. So process is really, really big. We want to make sure that you understand when it makes most sense for advocates to engage and when your voice is going to be most effectively heard. So we are going to talk about process. And to do that, we're going to talk about two different legislative processes. So the first is we're actually going to talk about the budget because that's huge, right? We know that even after a law is passed, oftentimes, unless there's funding to back it, the legislation itself may not have much teeth. So the budget really does make a difference. And the budget is also something that is annual. So that's something that's passed every single year in the legislature. So it's pretty big. We are going to do a couple of things. So we are going to talk through each of the processes and we're going to talk about when it makes sense for folks to get involved. But before actually we do that, we're just going to get to know and get familiar with the process itself. So first, we're going to take a look at the Massachusetts budget process, and then we're going to take a look at just the general process in Massachusetts in which a bill becomes a law. And we're going to do a high-level overview of that. And so in order to get us more engaged in this, we're actually going to do a large group activity where we use a Jamboard to put different activities or different steps of these processes in chronological order. Now, I will say, similar to knowing your legislators, there are some people who may know it because maybe it's just a bigger part of the work that you do, or you just may have more experience with the process. That's great. There are others who may not know at all, and that's okay too. And so what I'm going to do in this is I'm going to let you all take the lead. And as you all tell me where we should arrange different things, I'll put them there, and then just know that we will talk about the right ordering of those things in a little bit. So I am going to stop sharing this particular screen, and I'm going to share with you all another screen which has a Jamboard on it that we're going to use for this activity. So, all right. Okay, so let's look at this here. Can everybody see the screen? Can everybody see the Jamboard? Can I maybe get some thumbs up just to confirm that you all are looking at the same thing I'm looking at? Perfect. Alrighty. So you all will see different steps in the Massachusetts budget process. And what I want us to do as a large group is to talk about what order we think these things go in. And so I'm actually also, just if it's helpful, I am also going to share this link with you all. Let me see here. I'm just going to share the link in the chat so that you all can also, if anyone's having a difficult time seeing it, that you can pull it up on your screen as well. But everyone should be looking at this here. So you can look at it. I think I'm the only one who can move things around though. So you should only be able to view it. And I would love to know from you all, then taking a look at this, taking in all the different steps, what you think the first step in the process is. And so I'm going to give maybe just like 30 seconds for folks to look over these different steps. And then whenever someone has an idea of what they think should go first, please maybe either put something in the chat or take yourself off of mute and share. All right. So Joe has his hand raised. Joe, do you want to share what you think goes first?
I think that it's that the governor releases their draft budget.
Okay. So I'm going to shift that. All right. I'm shifting that there. Does everybody else sort of agree with that, that you think that this goes in this place, that this is the first step? And again, I'm not saying what's right or wrong right now. I'm just kind of doing what you all tell me to do. All right, so I'm seeing some head nods. All right, so we have what this group thinks is the first step in this process. What then comes next? And remember, you can either raise your hand, you can honestly take yourself off of mute without raising your hand as well, or you can type in the chat.
I'm not sure which one, but I would think maybe next would be the House or Senate budget debate, maybe.
Okay. So which one are you thinking? It's Tariq, right? Is that?
Yes.
Tariq, so you say you think debate comes next. Which one do you think? Do you think the House debate comes next or Senate debate?
Actually, I'm going to walk that back. I think the one that is second now could actually be next also.
Oh, okay. All right. So Tariq is saying what comes next is what's currently next already, which is House Ways and Means Committee releases draft budget. How do we feel about that as a group? And most people, I'm seeing a couple thumbs up. Most people feel okay about that? Okay. All right. So it's looking like we have our next step according to the group. All right. What then comes next after Tariq's step?
Maybe you replace the governor has 10 days with the box that says the Senate Ways and Means Committee releases a budget. Okay. They all release their budgets first.
All right, so we'll move that over here. How do folks feel about this? Thank you, Heather. How do folks feel? Do we feel good about this being the next step in the process? Let's see some thumbs up if we do, and if not, maybe take yourself off of mute and just share what you think might come next.
I feel like there might be some debate before the Senate gets involved, but I don't know which one.
All right. So Monica's saying, maybe not the Senate yet. Maybe there's like a debate that happens before we have the Senate releasing their budget. I see someone in the chat Camille says, I'm not sure if the House debate is before the Senate releases the budget as well. Okay. So it seems like we're between two here. It seems like we're between either Senate Ways and Means release their budget, or we are also between the House budget debate and caucuses. I'm going to ask folks to maybe type in the chat which they think comes next. Are we thinking it's House? I'm just going to kind of rearrange a couple things. Do we think it's the House budget debate, or do we think it's the Senate Ways and Means releasing their budget? Okay, I'm seeing budget, House budget, House debate. Okay, so alrighty, it's looking like most think that the House debate then would come next. So I'm gonna put that there. All right. What comes after that? So if this were the process and we were to have our House budget debate and caucuses, what do you all think would come next?
I would guess it would be amendments.
Okay. So which amendments, Joe?
Oh, well, they would co-sponsor the amendments, and then there would be the deadline for the amendments, I think. I mean.
Okay. All right. So Joe is saying maybe then up next we have something dealing with the amendments, and we have like maybe a co-sponsorship and then deadline for amendments. And then Camille's agreeing with that. Maria is saying reps, which I'm assuming, Maria, you're meaning you think what comes next is the representatives co-sponsor amendments. Okay, so this is what I'm hearing. I'm just going to put this in order of kind of what I'm hearing from you all. So we're saying this, and then we're saying that. Okay, is that something that the full group agrees with? Does the group feel good about that ordering specifically? Kathy's saying yes. All right, so I'm not hearing from others. So I'm going to assume that the group feels good about the current ordering. All right, so then, okay, so after the deadline for House amendments, what do you think folks come after that? What do folks think, will come after that step?
Alexis, I just a little point. Wouldn't amendments for the House, right, be introduced to a bill before the debate, right? So like that, when they're on the floor, they're going to be able to debate on those amendments, specific laws, especially because of budget.
So Jonathan is saying that perhaps we have the debate a little too soon. Jonathan's saying perhaps the amendments would actually need to come before the debate and before these things are taken to the floor. Does anyone else second that change from Jonathan? Because if we're listening to what Jonathan is saying, we would then move this House budget debate and caucus piece, and we would slide it after the deadline for House amendments. Does anyone else second that? Okay, Tariq seconds it. Anybody else? Also keep in mind, I can't see everybody since I have this screen going. So I'm just going off of what I hear or what I see in the chat. So I'm hearing a second from Tariq. And so unless somebody disagrees, I'm going to shift this now here, and I'm going to let us sit with this and see how people feel about this. Are people okay with this ordering here before we move on? Okay. All right. So what do you all think comes after this step of the House budget debate and caucuses? What do we think comes after that?
I would say the Senate Ways and Means Committee releases their budget.
Okay, so Tariq's saying Senate Ways and Means releases their budget, and I think Maria also said that in the chat. So we're gonna put our Senate here. What comes after? Do y'all wanna kind of mirror what you did for the House?
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
All righty. So we had this here, this there, and then Senate budget debate. Okay. All righty. So we have a mirroring. It seems like most people agreed with mirroring. What do you all think comes after the Senate budget debate? I'm seeing in the chat from Tariq, voting would come next. And so Tariq, when you say voting, I'm assuming you mean this one right here. Okay, Jonathan says conference committee, which we are in now. And then Maria also says reconcile. So I'm seeing more for conference committee as the next step. Do most people, does anyone want to like third or second, I suppose, that suggestion of conference committee coming next? Okay, Joe seconds. All right. Okay. All right, we're getting to the end here, guys. All right, so what do we think comes after conference committee? Okay, we have, a couple people saying vote. All right, so we're gonna slide the vote here. Yep, okay. And then what's after that? How are these last two arranged? So we have two options left. House and Senate can and do override any governor vetoes. And we also have the governor has 10 days to sign, veto, or make line item vetoes. Which comes next? Okay. All right. So we have veto and then we have override. All right. So this is the order that you all are recommending here. And I will say that you all are so very close. This is very close. There are just a couple that are slightly out of order. And that is really thinking about amendments and like when amendments are due. And I'm actually gonna stop sharing this screen so that I can kind of just walk through the process that you all, again, were pretty on the money with, just like a couple of things that have to be rearranged. So let me share this screen here. All right, so we've talked through this process, and I'm going to get in kind of like the step-by-step, but I just want us to see this general timeline here. This is a graphic that Mass Budget put out that we really like. So you all got the general steps right. So we first definitely do, actually, even before the governor releases his budget, we have the governor and the legislative leaders who have to agree on a revenue estimate, right? Because if we're spending money, we have to know how much money we actually have to spend. And so that will typically happen in December. In January, we then typically have the governor who releases the governor's budget. In April is when we usually see House Ways and Means Committee come out with their draft budget. And then in May is when we see the Senate go through their process. In June is when we have conference. So I think it was Jonathan who said we're in conference now, and Jonathan's absolutely correct. Conference committee happens in June, and that's when the House and Senate are resolving their differences, the differences in their budget. Then it goes to the governor's desk, who has an opportunity to veto. And then the legislature can and often does override the governor's veto with a 2/3 vote. And then by July 1, which is the start of the fiscal year, is typically when we have our final budget. So let's kind of go through these different steps, and let's talk about too where advocates come in and where advocates really have a chance to make an impact. So as we mentioned, you all are right on the money for so many of these steps, right? So we have the governor releasing the draft budget. Then we have House Ways and Means releasing a draft budget. Then we have the deadline for House amendments. So what will happen is legislators, after they have an opportunity to look through the draft that their Ways and Means Committee released, they have an opportunity to file an amendment. An amendment is just like it sounds like. An amendment is an opportunity for a legislator to propose a change to the budget. And so legislators have to file amendments. And so if I see, I'll give an example. One of the pieces of work that I help lead at our organization is transportation equity. And we do a lot of work to support the regional transit authorities, which are the authorities that serve residents outside of the greater Boston area. And so if I'm a legislator or if I'm an advocate and I'm looking at the budget and I'm saying, this is not enough money for RTAs, for regional transit authorities, that legislator might file an amendment that would increase the amount of money that RTAs receive, right? And so that's an amendment. And so we have the deadline for amendments, right? So that deadline comes first. Usually there are over 1,000 amendments, so a ton of amendments that legislators are filing. And then after that is when representatives co-sponsor amendments. So an amendment has to be filed before anyone co-sponsors. And if you all remember from what we talked about earlier, to co-sponsor is essentially to sign on in support of. So if I am Senator Chandler, let's say, and I file an amendment, maybe Senator Gomez is going to co-sponsor or sign on to my amendment. And the reason we want co-sponsorships is because the more co-sponsorships we have, the more support other legislators are showing for that amendment, and the more likely it is that that amendment might be adopted, right? And then after that, we have our House budget debate and we have House budget caucuses. Alrighty. And so that's when decisions are being made around which amendments should actually be adopted into the final budget. All right. And so that's sort of how the House budget is decided. Now, the stars that are on this screen are places that are denoting key opportunities for advocacy. So you'll see that we have a star next to the deadline for House amendments. As I mentioned before, we're thinking about the RTA work. We decided as a coalition, the RTA Advocates Coalition, how much money we wanted for RTAs for the fiscal year 22 budget. We talked with legislators before the amendment deadline even came to pass and talked about what we want that number to be. Our legislative champion agreed, and we came up with the language that was needed, and then they filed the amendment before the deadline, right? So that's a key moment of advocacy, to be talking to legislators and asking legislators to actually file an amendment that we need in order to see the change we want to see in the budget. Another key moment of advocacy is when representatives actually co-sponsor amendments. So once an amendment's been filed, if you're somebody who lives in, say, like an RTA service area, you know, let's say you're served by the WRTA or the Pioneer Valley Transit Authority, and you see that there's an amendment that's been filed to increase money for RTAs, you might say, okay, you know, my legislator didn't file this, but my legislator certainly can co-sponsor. And so you're going to be reaching out to your legislator to ask them to co-sponsor amendments. So those are kind of like key moments of advocacy within that House process. And so I'm just going to pause there to see if folks have any questions about the House process and how we get to kind of like a final House version of the budget. Yes, Joe.
Sorry, I know I feel like I'm dominating the conversation. Apologies, but I just had a question about like how and maybe we're going to get into this later, but I mean, how the language of the legislation itself is drafted. I mean, I know that we might have an idea, and maybe this is something that kind of to do more work in, but we might have an idea for a change we'd like to see. But when it comes to actually suggesting an amount or suggesting the language of the legislation or the amendment, can you maybe talk a little bit about that process and how that works?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. What I will say is this. I think a lot of this work, and you all already know it because a lot of you do community work, has to be done in coalitions with people who have different strengths and who bring different strengths to the table. So I will say, and I'm just giving an example, the RTA example that I've been talking through. So in our coalition, we have somebody who essentially has a lot of experience within working with the legislature and who is essentially like a spokesperson for an association for RTA administrators across the state. And so the budget is often something we all agree on. We don't agree on everything, but that's one thing we agree on, and she's within our coalition. And so when it comes time to talk to legislators about the language that should be drafted, she has a really good understanding. I'm not going to be able to write in like the legal language that's often used in a budget or in a piece of legislation, but she will, right? So that's something she can help with. I will also say that staff are a huge support, right? Like your actual legislator themselves and their staff can help. And so if there was a budget item that you cared passionately about and there wasn't already a coalition that was put together to work on that, and you approached your legislator and said, hey, this is why I think we need X amount of money in the budget for whatever thing, your legislator staff people can help with putting that together. They do have the experience in doing that. And so even though advocates can come with proposed language, and it's sometimes helpful for that to happen, if it's an issue that may not have as big of a coalition, or in the coalition there isn't somebody who kind of has that expertise, that's something that a legislator and their staff person can help with if they are on board for the change that you want to make. Does that make sense? Cool. Any other questions before we talk about the Senate process? Okay, alrighty. So the Senate process in many ways, as you all had kind of called earlier in our Jamboard, does mirror the House process. So when May then comes around, and this is after the House has finalized their budget, the Senate Committee on Ways and Means will release their draft budget. Then there will be the deadline for Senate amendments. And because there are, remember, fewer senators, we again have 40 state senators as compared to our 160 state House representatives. There are usually maybe a little over 800 amendments for the Senate budget. Then senators have an opportunity to show their support for amendments by co-sponsoring. And then there's the Senate debate before that budget's finalized. And so similar to the House, key opportunities for advocacy are when amendments are actually being filed. So upon release of the Senate Ways and Means budget, determining whether an amendment needs to be filed if there's a change that advocates want to see. And then the co-sponsoring of amendments. So asking your legislators to actually co-sponsor an amendment that, that you agree with. I want to say one thing that's important to note. Even though advocates do help to drive a lot of this, and again, to the point earlier, legislators don't know everything, right? They're not experts on everything. And so they rely on advocates to tell them, hey, this is or is not enough money for X, Y, or Z. They rely on that feedback. Even though advocates drive a lot of that process, an advocate can't file an amendment. Only a legislator can file an amendment. So partnerships and relationships with legislative champions is really huge in this process. Any questions about the Senate? Okay. Alrighty. And then last but not least, we then have conference and beyond. So as was mentioned earlier, we are currently in our conference committee right now. We are in the month of June, which is when that usually takes place. During conference committee is when the House and Senate reconcile their different versions of the budget. This process is often interesting. Sometimes the House will take the lead on something, sometimes the Senate will take the lead on something, and they'll leave something key out that they know the other chamber wants to use it as a leveraging tool or like a bargaining chip when they get into conference. And so there's a lot of kind of like wheeling and dealing that goes on during that process. But during that process, you have folks who are in leadership positions in the House and leadership positions in the Senate that are coming together to be conferees during that process and really taking the lead on reconciling those budgets. After a conference committee kind of agrees on what budget they want to put forward, the House and Senate each vote on the final budget, and these budgets at this point are identical because they've been worked out in conference. Then the governor has 10 days to sign, veto, or make line item vetoes to the budget, which the governor often does. And then finally, the House and Senate can and do vote to override any governor vetoes before the budget is finalized. So that is sort of our budget process. And before we hop into just kind of the overall bill process, I want to see if folks have any questions. And actually, before even questions, I'll just mention here too, you'll see the star here is next to conference committee. So this is another opportunity for advocates to take action. So especially advocates, if you know your representatives or your senators are involved in House Ways and Means and are going to be conferees, you certainly want to reach out to them and ask them to support whatever version of the budget that you want, or whatever specific piece of the House or Senate budget that you want in the final budget. And so that's certainly an opportunity for outreach and advocacy. And ideally, a lot of the work has gone into the previous processes with the House and Senate, where maybe you don't even have to reconcile because you have what you want in the House and Senate budget. So the final budget is going to reflect what you want because you got what you wanted in the House and the Senate. Any questions, thoughts, comments?
Hey, Alexis, how could, I guess, so an advocate, right, that will be keyed into a certain piece of legislation or certain budget, that draft budget that they want, but how could a standard person not in that process view those amendments or see kind of how that plays out?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tariq. So two things. So one, and I'll talk about this later too, as individuals, unless your organization's in a position where you're wanting to lead a campaign on, specific issues or specific policies, I would say the best way to know and to get action alerts for these things is to actually tap into an organization that is leading the campaign. And so, again, using the RTA as an example, if RTAs are really important to you and you know that MPHA, that our organization leads that coalition, then you want to make sure you're on our listserv, because we send out action alerts when each of these things happen to let people know, hey, we're entering conference and we got what we wanted or we didn't, and this is what you need to do. So I would say that as an individual, that's probably the easiest way. I will also say that any layperson can visit the Massachusetts legislature website and track these things. And so specifically for the budget process, there's sort of a timeline that they have up on the legislature's website, and it tracks like where we are in the timeline. And it also shows you the documents that have been finalized through each step of the process. And so if I wanted to check to see what the final House budget is, I could go to the website right now and click like House budget, and I could download that, and I can honestly search it in PDF form for the keywords that I'm looking for and see what was actually in the budget. There was something else I was going to say about that process. When it comes to amendments as well, you can also search amendments. So oftentimes, and the House and Senate does things differently for whatever reason. They all want to be different, but they do things slightly differently sometimes. But for each of those, you can always search an amendment. What you need is an amendment number. And so once you have an amendment number, you can always search it, and you can even check day by day to see who is signing on to co-sponsor versus who isn't. And so that's all through the Mass Legislature website, which I have a one-pager that I'm going to kind of plug at the end that just sort of walks through how to track some of these things if you create an account so that you get notifications for some of them is like an individual. So I'll also drop that in the chat kind of towards the end of our time together. That's a good question, Tariq. Any other questions? Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to stop sharing my screen, because we're going to do the same thing that we did for the budget with the bill process. So thinking about how a bill becomes a law. Again, this is high level, but I want us to just sort of get familiar with the process. You'll notice that there are definitely some similarities to the budget process, and there are also fewer steps that we're going to be talking about here. So I'm going to share my Jamboard again and go to the second page. So can everyone see the second page that has the bill process? It's all in blue as opposed to like the orange and yellow. Yes? Okay, great. And I'm just going to put the link again in the chat so that folks have it in case it's no longer on your screen. Cool. Alrighty. So This right here, these are just some steps in the bill process. And so I would love for us to do the same thing that we did last time, which you all, again, really excelled at. And let's try to put these in order. So can I get any takers to name what they think goes first in this process?
Session begins.
Aha, all righty. So Monica is saying session begins, and Hannah seconds that, and I think that most people probably would too. So let's go ahead and put that first. Okay. What do you all think comes after the session begins? Oh, and sorry, I can like also zoom in a little bit here. Let's see. Okay. All righty. All right, I'm seeing somebody in the chat say committees assigned. All righty. So Margaret is saying that committees are assigned next. Does anyone second that? Ah, Jonathan says bills are filed. Ah, and Camille also says bills are filed. Okay, so I'm seeing most people say what comes next is the bills being filed. So I'm just gonna, whoops, what did I do? Oh, it's because I still have it on Zoom. Okay. Come on, Alexis, let's get it together here. Zoom out. Okay, cool. So we have bills being filed. I'm gonna slide that in next. What comes after bills being filed? Okay, Jonathan saying co-sponsorships. Does anyone second co-sponsorships? Yep, okay, Kathy's also saying co-sponsorship. Camille's like, maybe, shrugs. All right, so I'm gonna put co-sponsorships next, and let's like sit with it and see how we feel about it. Do we feel okay about that being next? Maybe like a couple thumbs up to see how folks are feeling. All right, I have a couple thumbs ups. Okay, all righty. So what about after the co-sponsorships? What do you all think happens? Monica, thanks for welcoming your friend into the screen. It's very cute. Yes, Tanaya, I agree. Kathy's saying maybe hearings come next after the bill co-sponsorships. Does anyone else second that? Tariq's saying bills are divided into committees next. All right, so we have a vote for hearings. We have a vote for bills being divided into committees. And then Camille says that she agrees with Tariq that bills would be divided into committees. So I'm just gonna shift this here. Okay, and Brian seconds. Okay, all righty. So we have then bills divided into committees. What do you all think comes after that? Okay, Jonathan saying assigned, that reps and senators are assigned to committees. Okay, Kathy is seconding that. All right, we're moving and grooving. I'm gonna shift that over. Okay, all righty. What about after our reps and senators are assigned to committees? What do you all think comes after that? Hearings. Oh, okay. So hearings is what we're hearing next. Okay. And then what do you all think comes after that? We only have two options left. All right, leadership, Brian says, will move things along before we have floor votes take place. All righty. You all killed it. Y'all killed it. This is awesome. This is awesome. This is the process that we see. So you all are like right on the money for this. Let me stop sharing this screen, and I'm just going to share my other one, just so we can also look at the timeline. So let me do this, transition again. All right. So you all are absolutely correct. So we have our session that begins, and again, remember, sessions begin on odd numbered years. We have January 2021, which I mean, I want to say was just here, but I guess we're in June now, so it's been a minute. But we have our sessions that begin. We have our bills that are filed, 5,000 to 7,000, a lot of bills. And then we have our co-sponsorships that come up, because remember, once a bill is filed, then representatives and senators can co-sponsor or sign on to support a bill. From February to March of 2021, we have bills that are being divided into committees and reps and senators who are being assigned to committees. And then really from March until December, when the session ends, there are so many different things that can happen. And again, it takes a while because there are a ton of bills. So committee hearings are held for some bills. So not every bill is actually going to get a committee hearing. Some bills are favorably reported out of committee. And so as we mentioned before, right, each committee has sort of a subject area of bills that they really focus on. And it's the responsibility of the committee to report favorably or unfavorably on that bill. If the bill is reported favorably, it then moves on through a process that really is not necessarily to get into. All you need to know is that leadership plays a huge role in moving forward those favorable bills. There are sometimes favorable bills that leadership doesn't want to move along, which means it will not come to a floor vote. So again, as we talked about earlier, leadership plays a huge role in shaping the agenda. Leadership is core. Remember, every representative has a vote, but core leadership actually decides what gets to come to a vote or not. And then finally, a floor vote is held for some bills, the bills that make it. And if the vote is positive and overwhelming, then that bill is passed, right? And then of course we have opportunity for the governor to veto, and then the House and Senate to override that veto, and then it becomes law. So that's sort of just an overview, like a high level overview of the process. I want to say two things. One is that even though we have 2-year sessions, there's a lot of legislation. There's some legislation that within the first session that it's filed will be passed, and that's great. There's also a lot of legislation that's strong legislation that it takes several sessions to actually get passed. Like it doesn't always happen upon the first time. So this can be a really long process, even going beyond an actual session when the bill is first filed. I will also say that even if the legislation that sets up a program or a structure is passed, sometimes there's more that actually has to happen. So an example of that is we at the Massachusetts Public Health Association have done a lot of work historically on access to healthy and affordable foods. We did a lot of work with the Massachusetts Food Trust Program, which some of you might be familiar with, and assistance to basically the affordable foods. And I'm sorry, I'm like freezing. Can you all hear me? Okay. A little wonky. What is Zoom doing?
Looks like we might have lost Alexis for a moment.
Alexis, you're muted, so we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
There we go.
All right, I truly don't know what's happening with my Zoom right now. Sorry about that. I don't know what's happening with Zoom, but I'm glad you all can hear me now. So yeah, so essentially what I was talking about is the Massachusetts Food Trust Program. So it's a program that provides loans and grants and business assistance for increasing access to healthy, affordable food in low-income, under-resourced areas. And so there was the program itself that had to be passed in the legislation, right? So that was the first step, which actually passed, I think, within the first session or two that it was introduced and filed, which is great. But then even after that was passed, we had to think about operating funds and we had to think about capital funds, and all of that took time. And so this process, even though, you know, I'm sort of providing like a bird's eye view of the process, it seems fairly straightforward and fairly simple. It does take time. And to the point that I mentioned earlier, if leadership isn't on board, even if there's tons of support, like our Prevention Wellness Trust Fund, which is work that MPHA worked with others in a coalition to really work to pass some years ago. It was passed as a pilot program, increased funding for evidence-based prevention programming throughout the state. After the 5-year pilot was over, we knew that we needed the funds to be re-upped, and we wanted to get that money from big insurers and hospitals, but that had to be kind of written into law. And it was supposed to be included in a big healthcare reform bill. There was tons of support. There was mayoral support, and there were tons of advocates who are really passionate about it. There were tons of representatives and senators who were really happy with it and wanted to see it passed. And yet it died on the floor and it never came to a vote because it was not a part of leadership's priority. And so even when support is built, that's one of the reasons I really emphasize some of those leadership roles, because it really is important to try to influence some of those key decision makers. Because even if there's other support, if leadership isn't on board, the bill will not move forward, even if it gets a favorable report out of a hearing. So I'm gonna pause there and just see if there are any questions that folks have. Yeah. Before we talk about actual legislative engagement.
And I think we lost connection to your slides, Alexis, just FYI.
Yes, and I took them down on purpose.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to make sure.
We had the question, are the favorable bills all voted on over several days in December? Ooh, that's a really good question. No, they come to vote at different points throughout the year, Kathy. And I will also just say that hearings are super unpredictable. And so we filed a bill with legislators earlier in the year when the session started. And we're hoping that we get a hearing. A hearing could come 3 weeks from now. A hearing could come 4 months from now. We don't know. And so as advocates, we also kind of have to be prepared. And I'll just note too that a hearing, for those who may not be familiar, is essentially a time where folks who are really supportive of a piece of legislation get to come together and provide testimony, written and oral, and essentially like shape the narrative and craft the narrative of like why that bill is important. So we have a couple of things in the chat. Hannah says it's quite disappointing to hear that a supported bill can never make it to vote just because of a few people. You know, Hannah, it is. One thing I would say is that the folks in leadership roles don't always stay in leadership roles. So this year we have a new Speaker of the House. And so knowing that it's possible for leadership to change, one. I would also say it's possible, and we're going to talk about legislative engagement, to pressure leadership, because you're right. There are some times where, you know, you have a one-to-one meeting with the legislator and they may not be supportive of things. But the reason why we mobilize advocates is because we want to pressure. We don't just want to persuade, we want to pressure decision makers, and leadership can be pressured. And so I totally hear where you're coming from. And it is kind of stinky that like such power exists in like a few hands. But I would say that there are ways to pressure. And also, as advocates, there are formal positions of power, which we've talked about, but there are also informal positions of power. So there, you could have a legislator who, even if they're not Speaker of the House, let's say, they may not be Speaker of the House, they may not have a formal leadership position, but they could have a relationship with somebody who has a lot of influence over the Speaker of the House. And so there are also those informal power dynamics that are at play that we can't always see. And so there's always sort of a way around and a way to push through. And sometimes it just means that we have to continue to file a bill until we see the change. But it's definitely possible. And we also have a question here from Brian. Does this process happen every year, every other year? So the bill process itself, Brian, happens every other year in that every legislative session is 2 years. So as I mentioned before, our legislative session that we're currently in started January 2021, and it'll go to December of 2022, which means that over the course of the next couple of years is when the House will debate and co-sponsor and debate and hold hearings on the legislation that was filed in February. And then after that 2 years is up, we go through another process of another 5,000 to 7,000 bills being filed, and then it kind of starts over again, if that answers your question. And Joe, I see your hand up. Yeah.
Sorry, yeah, I just was going to go back to the kind of something I mentioned before about, so like Bruce Tarr is our state rep here, and he's in leadership, but on the minority side, is there anything like specific about that to know? Is there any, is that influential? I mean, I think, you know, it's a title, you know, minority leader. It's got leadership in the name, so we kind of assume it's influential. But I just don't really know, like realistically, what kind of the expectation should be around leadership on that side.
Yeah, and I would honestly, my short answer to that would be, it really just kind of depends. It depends on the person. There are some leadership roles that are like formal leadership roles, but they actually don't have as much power. And it could be somebody who has an informal relationship with, let's say, the Speaker of the House or like the Senate President, that's even more powerful than a person who has an official leadership title. So I would say it really depends on the position itself, and it also depends on the person and the type of influence that they wield in those relationships with other legislators, their colleagues. The only other thing I would say about minority leaders, and I welcome anyone else who has experience working with the legislature too to chime in on this, but because there are fewer folks who are in the minority party, they have to be a part of certain committees. And so they might have like a ranking title because it's like important for their voice to be heard in whatever committee it is, which I think can be a good thing because it might mean that they have their hands in more pots because there are fewer of them. But I would also say that we've seen in Massachusetts, you know, Democratic legislators and Republican legislators work really well together on certain things. So you will often see bills that are filed by somebody in the minority party that are supported by folks in the majority party. Yeah, I don't know if anyone else has something to add that might help Joe think through this too. Okay. All right. Any other questions before we talk about legislative engagement? Okay.
Yes, Alexis, real quick, I threw in the chat. I guess throughout the legislative process that you outlined, how does that advocacy, or if at all, does it change at all? Does your strategy once it builds a conference change versus early on? How does that work?
Yes, the answer to that is like, yes, definitely. And it honestly just depends. It definitely changes, right? And I think it changes in part because what you're asking for changes. Like at the beginning of the session, if my goal as an advocate is to get a legislator to file a bill, right? My strategy is going to be completely different because I'm thinking at that point, all right, who are my allies? Who has supported this? And so like the way that I'm targeting them is going to be a little bit different because I might already have relationships with the legislators who we know need to file. And it's maybe like an easier an easier road. So like my ask is different. So my advocacy at that point is going to be a lot different than say my advocacy by the time the hearing comes around, because by the time the hearing comes around, I'm not just targeting my allies and seeing who can file a bill. I'm targeting everybody on that, like I'm targeting the people who are in leadership roles on that committee. And so I have to target my advocacy to who I know has the power to give me what I want. And that sometimes changes throughout the process. Does that make sense? So definitely where you are in the process certainly shapes how you are approaching a legislator. So whether you are meeting with them in private, whether you're engaging them publicly, whether it's just you that's engaging the legislator, or if you're mobilizing a larger group of people. So all of that is going to differ depending on where you are in the process, certainly. And it also differs depending on what's happening politically and like what the climate looks like, right? And so all of those things go into your strategy and shaping strategy. And I would just say, for anybody who has questions, who's actually trying to launch any particular campaigns in your community, and you want to have conversations about strategy, please, let's talk offline. This training, we're talking more so about process and engagement, but we certainly also have conversations with folks about actually building out strategy and what it looks like to kind of shape your tactics or your activities to really have maximum impact with the decision makers that you're targeting. So those are certainly conversations we can have offline too. Okay, so let's go into this next piece, which is looking at engagement. So I'm going to reshare my screen. So tell me if you can't see, but I'm assuming most people can see this now. Alrighty, so we've talked about how to, we've talked about the fact that we didn't want to get the right information to the right people, who in this case is our legislature and specific people with power in our legislature, at the right time. So we talked about process and when it makes sense for advocates. Oh, and actually, you know what? Something I did not do, going back a slide, when advocates should get involved. Very similar to the budget process, advocates can get involved in a few different spaces here. So one, there is actually space for advocates to get involved when bills are being filed. So if there's a bill that you want to get filed, talking to your legislator about that, that's a space where advocates can have impact. Another space is co-sponsoring requests and asking your legislator to co-sponsor or sign on in support of a bill. So that's a space where advocates can have impact. And the co-sponsorship process, by the way, I think for actually both the House and Senate this session, basically goes until a bill is on the floor. So a legislator can co-sponsor a bill that hasn't gone to a floor vote yet today, just like they might be able to co-sponsor it like 2 months from now. So that process can be pretty long with the general bill process. And advocates can also really be impactful during the hearing process. So when you know that a hearing is coming up, which again, you can either know from being tapped in with an organization that does this type of work and they notify you, or by signing up to track the hearings online and see when those are coming up. That's another space where advocates can be really impactful, because that's where stories and testimonies are shared. So that's another space for advocates to really make a difference. Okay, so sorry for that brief interruption, but yeah, so we've talked about the right people, we've talked about the right time and when advocates should get involved. Now we're going to talk about how do we actually engage our legislators? What does that look like? So I'm going to ask y'all a question. When do you think advocates should engage legislators? And you can either take yourself off of mute or you can pop this into the chat. Constantly, Joe says, constantly. I'm seeing some head nods, and I would completely agree with you, Joe. Absolutely. Yep, we have Karen too, and Heather as well. Karen says, before we need to ask for something, and Heather says, develop relationships all the time. And y'all are right on the money, right? Even though we've talked through these different key moments in like the budget process or the bill process where advocates can have a lot of impact, the most impact you're gonna have is when you engage legislators year round. Remember, we in Massachusetts have full-time legislators. We have a lot of access to our legislators, y'all. And so that means throughout the year, we should be building out those relationships, because to Karen's point, when we actually need something, if I'm a legislator and Karen has been engaging me throughout the year and Karen reaches out to say, hey, can you co-sponsor a bill? I'm much more likely to listen to Karen than I will maybe Tariq, if Tariq's only approaching me in that moment in time, right? And so that relationship really, it really matters, and it helps us to build influence with our legislators. So we definitely want to be building those relationships all the time. Heather says, we also have community orgs that lead legislators breakfast every year so that they will have to come back and answer to us later. Absolutely, Heather. There are so many different ways you can be constantly building that relationship, whether it be through events that other people are welcome to attend, whether it be through like one-to-one conversations. There are different ways. And we're going to talk to you about different methods and ideas for how to engage your legislators. So with that being said, we want to make the most of our superpower. And so there are a couple of things I want to do. So one is I'm going to kind of go through just a few tips for building relationships with your legislators. I'm also going to pop in the chat a one-pager that we have at MPHA with just general rules for setting up a meeting with your legislator if you're interested in having a conversation with them in person. So I've just put in the chat the link to that document. And I'm just going to talk through a few tips that are not on that document. So one is that you have more power if you are registered to vote and if you voted in recent elections. So your legislators and their staff can't necessarily see who you voted for, but they can see whether a person is registered to vote and whether they voted in recent elections. And as we mentioned before with the power of the constituent, a lot of that comes from the ability for the constituent to elect folks into power. And so if I'm a legislator, I'm going to be more likely to pay attention to somebody who I know is an active voter than someone who maybe isn't registered at all. So that's just a note. Another is that stories are stickier than data. So when we talk to legislators, and we're going to talk about just kind of like a formula of things you want to make sure you're including in your interactions with legislators. But when you talk to legislators, data is great. Data can persuade for sure, but stories are much more powerful. And you want to come in with both, but do not forget the story, because the story is something that's going to resonate with the heart instead of just the head. And it's something that a legislator is more likely to remember when they're talking to their colleague and they're trying to persuade their colleague to vote a certain way. They are going to remember that story more than they might that data point. So remember that. Remember to keep your discussion of the issue concise, because your interaction, whether it's an email, whether it's an in-person meeting, whatever your interaction looks like, it will likely be fairly brief. And so you want to make the most of the time that you have. Do not ignore the staff. Staff help to shape a legislator's schedule and like how they're spending their time. They help legislators think through what their position should be on different issues. Staff make a huge difference. And so when you meet with a legislator, or even like you're building a relationship via email, acknowledge their staff, build a relationship with their staff, because their staff are going to be the ones often when you want to talk about something, you're more likely than not going to get the staff person sometimes than you will the actual legislator themselves. You will get the legislator sometimes, but you'll always at least have a staff person in the room. And so the relationships that you build with them are helpful. And then lastly, follow up with a thank you note. If a legislator takes action that you ask them to take, they're going to remember those thank yous. They don't get them often. You know, not a lot of people reach out and talk to their legislators. And so if your legislator does something that you've asked them to do, or if they've engaged in a way that aligns with your ask, be sure to follow up with them and thank them, because they will remember that. And that will just be one additional feather in your cap for building out that relationship and influence with the legislator. Does anyone have any questions about these things here on screen? Another thing I will actually mention too that's not here is thinking about committees. So I know we talked earlier about different committees and knowing what committees your legislator is on and everything like that. Remember that even if, like, let's say there's a certain public health bill, like a bill that'll be with the Joint Committee on Public Health that you want to see passed, and your legislator maybe isn't on that committee, as we mentioned before about informal relationships and power, your legislator can still advocate on your behalf with their colleagues. So even if they're not on the committee, they likely know someone on the committee, and they can be talking to committee leaders and trying to get them to vote in favor of whatever that piece of legislation is. So even if your legislator isn't in like the formal position of power that you're trying to target, it can still be really beneficial to reach out to them because they still can have influence over the process. Okay, so let's talk secret weapons. And actually, I see something in the chat. Okay, so Camille asked, what is the relationship between state versus federal legislators? I'm wondering if it's worth it to gain support from a state legislator on a federal issue if you have a relationship with that state legislator. Camille, and anyone else, please feel free to chime in too with any thoughts. I would say it never hurts. It never hurts. If you're looking to have influence over the federal process, I think your state legislator can certainly be a good place to start, because at the very least, they likely have a relationship with the federal representative for your part of the state, if that makes sense. So I certainly don't think that's like, it doesn't hurt to start there. As far as like how close they are with legislators that have power at sort of like the national level, I think it honestly just depends on the legislator. But I think it certainly doesn't hurt to ask. And at the very least, your legislator might be able to tell you who you should be reaching out to. Even if they don't necessarily have a relationship with the person, that's a good space. Ooh, thank you for chiming in on that. Joe says, we have been told that mayors are a good place to start on some federal issues. Thanks for that tip, Joe. Okay, so when we think about our secret weapons, these are just sort of the key ingredients I want you to be bringing into interactions with your legislators. So one is solutions over problems. So when you're talking to a legislator and you want them to know about an issue that you care about, certainly outline the problem for them. But you also want to come to them with a solution, and you want to talk more about the solution than you do the problem. So that's one piece, solutions over problems. So if I'm wanting to advocate for more money for regional transit, sure, I might talk about the ways in which regional transit is underfunded and how that's contributed to different gaps in service, like a need for extended hours and a need for more frequent bus service. Those are certainly problems I might talk about, but I'm going to talk even more about how a certain bill is going to actually help support regional transit authorities, if that makes sense. So you want to come with solutions over problems. You want to come with stories and data. So again, we want head and heart. So our data gets to our head, our stories get to heart. And so it's great to come with some data, sure, but also bring some stories with you. And then last, but very importantly, you want a clear ask for your legislator. Hey, Senator Gomez, can you co-sponsor this bill? Hey, Rep Blay, can you be sure to attend this hearing, right? You want a clear ask for your legislator. Even if the ask is just, can you come to our legislative breakfast, right? But you want a clear ask for your legislator when you're talking with them. Alrighty. So what we're gonna do in a bit, but not yet, is we are actually going to role play as legislators and constituents. And you all are gonna do these in groups of 2. And we're gonna walk through a couple of steps in order to make this happen. So a couple of things. Remember, when you're engaging your legislator, you wanna talk about the problem and the solution. You want to talk about why they should care, and then also make it clear what you're asking them to do. So what we're going to do to practice, and we're going to see how this works. I'm hoping it works well. But you all in your registration talked through some issues that you all care about. And so what I've done is I've found 4 different bills that cover some of the areas of interest that you all mentioned. I will say, I'm going to be very honest, very transparent. A couple of these bills, like one in particular, we at MPHA endorse, and like I know a little bit more about. Some of the others I actually don't know that much about. It was just kind of looking to see what's up in other policy areas, even those that we don't focus on. But what you'll do is you're going to have a sheet of paper, and I'm actually going to share the link in the chat. So give me a quick second. Here we go. Okay, so I'm gonna put in the chat, and Tanayo just put some questions in the chat for us, which is great, or the questions that kind of guide the thinking about your approach to legislators. Okay, so I'm putting in the chat a Google Doc, and that Google Doc actually has those different bills that I mentioned that we're gonna be sort of playing around with today. And so there's one bill, food insecurity is one thing that you all seem to have an interest in. And so there's one bill, the Universal School Meals Bill, that would essentially ensure students receive free meals through their school without having to sign up for benefits or provide financial eligibility information. And so if you're interested in food insecurity, maybe that is a bill that you're going to be pretending to ask your legislator to support. We have the prison moratorium bill, which would implement a 5-year moratorium on studying, designing, searching, or building new correctional facilities. We have the Fare Free Pilot Bill, which is essentially a bill that would pilot a fare free program on the MBTA and also RTA buses. And then lastly, there's the Addiction Treatment Access Bill, which would expand access to further treatment by requiring public and private insurance carriers to cover up to a total of 30 days of treatment if the treating clinician deems that those services are medically necessary. And so those are 4 bills. They're all laid out on the link, through the link that I just put in the chat. And so you all should be able to access that and see that on your computer screen. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to just look that through. What I need you to do is I want you to look through those bills and identify which one you want to advocate on behalf of for the purposes of today's activity. All right. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes to look through these and decide which one you want to support. And the ask, by the way, that all of you are going to be making for all of these bills is you want your legislator to co-sponsor the bill. So think about which one you want to select. Yep, Camille, I will definitely paste the link again. Okay, so everyone should have had an opportunity to decide which of these bills they want to, approach their legislator about. And what you all are going to do in a bit, but not yet, is you are going to break into groups of 2. So you're going to be put into groups of 2, and you all are going to take turns. And we're going to maybe say, like, maybe if we can do 10 minutes in our groups. Honestly, actually, maybe even 8 minutes in our groups. And so you'll try to do 4 and 4, right? So one person will take 4 minutes to be the legislator, and the other the constituent, and then you'll switch so that both people get an opportunity to be the constituent. And you're going to talk to your legislator and essentially ask them to co-sponsor the bill of choice, but you're going to use the framing that's on the screen. And Tanayo put the guiding questions in the chat. So you want to be thinking about what's the problem and what's the solution that's being proposed. why should they care? So maybe think about some stories or data that you might know of. And then what are you asking them to do? What's your clear ask? And again, to remind you all, the clear ask that all of you are asking for today is to co-sponsor the bill. So you want your legislator to co-sponsor the bill in these conversations. All right. And the legislator, when you're in that role, you don't have to do anything. You just sit and you basically can just sit and listen. Because I recognize these aren't bills that all of you know about, or even like specific issues around these issue areas that you might care about.
Could you talk for just a second about why a legislator might refuse to co-sponsor a bill? They all sound like such great ideas.
Sure. So there are a lot of reasons the legislator might not co-sponsor a bill. It could be because of the funding. So maybe like the bill, it's like, oh, it's a great idea, but we don't have the money for it. It could be because they just don't think it's sound policy. They just don't think it's a good policy decision. It could also be that there are other issues that they care more about, and they don't want to co-sponsor too many bills. Like I think even in certain leadership positions, there are certain leaders that will not co-sponsor bills if they're the leader of a committee and if it might come before their committee. So there are some that choose not to do that. So there could be a whole host of reasons why a legislator may not support a bill, or it could be that they just don't agree with it. Like on like an ideological perspective, like they don't agree. And so they may not want to co-sponsor. That's a good question, Heather.
Thank you.
Yeah. Alrighty. Any questions about what we're doing in our small groups before we break up into those pairs? You have the questions that's sort of guiding your framing of the bill, and you have the bills themselves and what they do and what your ask is. All right. So why don't we go ahead and break up into our pairs? Alrighty. So let's maybe just take a minute. If there's anybody that wants to just share how it felt, what kind of came up for you in that exercise, please do. I want us to get through a few more things, but I would just want to give you all an opportunity to just share with the larger group. So maybe if we can have 1 or 2 volunteers.
I don't mind volunteering. I worked with Heather. We just finished a great role play, and Heather chose, I was the legislator when she was the advocate for transportation, free fare. And she just spoke from the heart the whole time. It was amazing. And not that we'd spent a whole lot of time on that part, Heather, but when we did get to that, she was able to be impassioned because she was able to cite her family and how it's a family value to be able to access public transportation, therefore participate in life. And she cited her grandmother, who was, Heather, please correct me, your grandmother was the first paralegal in the state? Oh, you're on mute.
The first female paralegal in the state.
Wow.
Who didn't have a driver's license, maybe? Okay. And so that was driven home to her as a granddaughter. So yes, I co-sponsored it. I told her absolutely. I would not be good at that job.
Thank you for sharing that, Monica and Heather. I appreciate it. All right, so I'm just going to share my screen again so we can go through a few more things before we end today. So thank you all for engaging in that activity. Again, you'll have these slides, but just keep those things in mind when you are interacting with legislators. Solution over problem, data and stories, and then a clear ask. All right. So, and also, I don't know if I needed to mention this. I thought I did earlier, but I might not have. All of those bills that we discussed are active. They were all filed this legislative session. So if any of those are of interest to you, yeah, you will be able to track them. So just a quick note on methods of engagement. I believe it was Tariq who had asked this question earlier around, like, how do we know, like, you know, how can we be engaging our legislators? What does that look like? You know, do our tactics sort of change with you know, where we are in the process. And I had answered that question to basically say yes. And so I just want to share some different ways of engaging legislators. So there are ways to engage legislators in private through meeting with them in districts, in Boston at the State House, using phone call, email, or snail mail, a group sign-on letter. So there are private ways. There are also public ways that we can be engaging our legislators. So that might look like an op-ed or a letter to the editor. That might look like tweeting them or adding them. I'm not a social media person on social media. It might be a legislative breakfast. So I think there was someone earlier who had mentioned hosting a legislative breakfast with their legislators every year, where they talk about their programming and may share some of their priorities, and could even ask legislators point blank, do you support X, Y, or Z, right? And as a way of holding them accountable. There are hearings, which we've talked about, and there are also special events and forums that folks can host. And I would just say, when thinking about which method of engagement to use, one, again, if you're engaging with an organization that does a lot of this work, they will provide which method should be used, and they can give advice around that. But I would also say this is very much shaped by how much pressure we want to apply, right? So if you've already met with a legislator one-to-one and it hasn't really resulted in much action, maybe then the next step is mobilizing more folks and having engaging with them in a way that is more public, right? Where other people can see how the legislator is responding. And so a lot of the methods and how we're choosing to engage legislators often depend on where we are in the policymaking process, whether or not a legislator is already an ally or not, and how much pressure we need to provide, and whether we need to be mobilizing other people to take action with us, right? Sometimes an in-district meeting just isn't cutting it. Sometimes we need to call a legislator out on social media, or sometimes we need to be engaging them at a hearing, because that's the part in the process where we are in that piece of legislation getting passed. So this is just a note on what I mentioned earlier. For effective strategic advocacy, you could do one of two things, right? These questions about getting the right information to the right people at the right time, using the right method, with the right people, with the right messengers. Those steps, right? Thinking through all of those things are things that you could do on your own or with your coalition, with a coalition that you're building out. And, you all are sort of spearheading those decisions and making those decisions for how to carry a campaign forward. Or, as I mentioned before, many of you aren't in a place where you can do that because you don't have that capacity. However, there are tons of organizations that are leading campaigns around issues that you care about. And these organizations, like the Massachusetts Public Health Association, analyze policy, we build coalitions, and we know when and how to take action to influence legislators. And so a lot of that is sometimes easy to find. Sometimes it's simply a matter of looking up an organization that works on an issue that you care about in your region. And oftentimes you can find organizations that have somebody whose specific role it is to lobby and who can provide that information. I've provided on this slide a few examples of issue areas that you all mentioned in registration with coalitions that actually address these issues and can help to analyze policy and build coalitions to get policies around that issue area passed. And so the examples that I've put up here are Feed Our Kids. That's actually the coalition that is responsible for the Universal School Meals Bill that was on that document that we looked at just now. The RTA Advocates Coalition is the coalition that we at MPHA help to lead with Transportation for Massachusetts. And then Building Up People Not Prisons is a group that works a lot on criminal justice reform, and they're the ones who helped to file the bill around the prison moratorium. If you are choosing to lead this work on your own or with your organization and you're taking the lead, you can also find a lot of this information online that you need through the Massachusetts legislature.gov website. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to put in the chat a one-pager that we have for you all that shows you how to navigate this website and track different bills and hearings on your own. So I'm putting this in the chat now. Anyone who's interested. And so that will actually show you how to navigate that website. Again, it's something that a lot of people aren't necessarily in a position to do. And so it's not something that, it's not something that I want to spend time talking about, but I did just want to make sure you know that a lot of this information you can also track on your own. Alrighty. And lastly, I just want to make a few notes about lobbying. So I'm going to skip over a couple of these things. The difference between advocacy and lobbying is essentially that lobbying is very specific to asking a legislator to take action on a particular piece of legislation. So whereas something like advocacy could be letting your legislator know how food insecurity is affecting folks in your region, lobbying would specifically be asking a legislator to co-sponsor a bill or vote to support a bill that would mitigate food insecurity, like the Universal School Meals Bill, right? So lobbying is very specific to a piece of legislation. And that can either be done directly by directly engaging your legislator and asking them to take a specific action, or it could be grassroots lobbying, which is mobilizing a group of people to ask their legislator to take specific action. But it is very specific to the policy. It's not general like general advocacy typically is. So an example I'll give, lobbying might be sending a mass email to a listserv, asking people on that listserv to contact their legislator about co-sponsoring a bill that protects low-income folks from being evicted, right? That's an example of lobbying. An example of advocacy is organizing a public forum for local politicians to debate and share their views on transportation issues, right? What about this one here? Speaking with the legislator about how a farmer's market incentive, the farmer's market incentives program has impacted the community. Do you all think that that's lobbying or advocacy? And you could just call it out.
Lobbying.
Oh, okay. So we're hearing lobbying here. Does anyone just, do others agree with Joe that this is lobbying, or do you think it's advocacy?
That means I'm wrong, right?
No, it doesn't necessarily, but like, yes, in this case it does. So just sharing with a legislator how something has impacted a community, that is not lobbying, right? Like that's not asking the legislator to take action. This next one that I just pulled up of calling or writing members of the legislature and asking them to vote against a current version of a climate bill, that is lobbying because it's specific to a piece of policy and it's asking a legislator to take action around a specific piece of policy. Does that make sense? So advocacy is often more broad, it's educational, it's raising awareness, whereas lobbying is specifically asking a legislator to take action on policy.
Right. My guess had been that because it was related to a specific incentive program that maybe it was like supporting that specific program, but that totally makes sense. I get that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Alrighty. So again, and I know we're at time, we're like a minute over. I just want to share these last couple pieces. So when and how can you lobby? This is something that gets people afraid often, but lobbying is not a dirty word. It's not a bad thing. And honestly, most of you can lobby. It's just about thinking about when and how. So a couple of notes is that we all have a responsibility to lobby. If you care about your community, caring about your community means advocating for your community and making sure that your legislators know what your community needs. That's all lobbying is. And so most of you, I just want to note, are never going to hit a threshold that would jeopardize your nonprofit's 501c3 status, or that would require you to register as a lobbyist. Now, for those of you who are a lobbyist with your organization, that's something different, right? Like if you have a full-time lobbyist, maybe that's something to think about, but most of you will never hit that threshold and it's not something you need to think about. If you do think that you could be somebody who would need to register as a lobbyist, so if you're doing more than like an hour of advocacy, an hour of lobbying every single week throughout the year, if that's the type of work that you're doing, let's talk offline. But most of you would never hit that threshold. I do want to say that if your work is 100% state or federally funded, you may not be able to lobby through your actual work, right? Because there are laws around that, but you can lobby on your own personal time. If you work for government, oftentimes people think folks who work for government can't lobby, but that's actually not the case. Legally, oftentimes government employees can lobby. It's rather checking with your organization to ensure that the policies within the organization would allow a person to lobby. So sometimes it's just a matter of organizational policy and checking with your employer. I want to leave you all off with this, remembering that being effective strategic public health advocates is getting the right information, right? Which we talked about, connecting with the right organizations to help get you that information, or tracking it yourself online. You have that one pager. To the right people or person, in this case, we're talking about our legislators. And we know that our legislators, there are some who have more power than others. And we want to make sure we're directing our messages towards the right people in the legislature. At the right time, you now know about the budget process, the bill process, and know when advocates can and should take action. Using the right method and format, you know your key ingredients of stories and data and solutions over problems, and having a clear ask. And then also, you want to make sure it comes from the right messenger. And I would say that oftentimes you yourselves, or the constituents that you engage through your work, are the right messengers and the folks that legislators need to hear from. So that is all she wrote. I'm going to pop in the chat an interest form. If you all are interested in taking action with us as an organization, I'm going to send a Google form so you can be added to some of our listservs. But that is all she wrote. And I'm happy to stay after for a few minutes, at least till like 1:15, to answer any questions that folks have. I know we're over time, and I'm very sorry.
Thank you so much, everyone, for staying. Thank you, Alexis, for a great training. I feel like I learned so much, as usual, from MPHA and from you. This is our last training of the year, so stay tuned for our newsletter to announce our trainings for next year. And again, please take our survey. Give us any feedback that you think is relevant, whether that's via email or through the survey, and we'll send out the video recording and the slides and the feedback form one more time and a follow-up email sometime next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alexis, could I just ask you to clarify a little bit again on the point you just made a minute ago about if you're funded with state or federal grant money?
Yes.
What the restrictions or limitations are?
Yeah, so if you're 100% funded by the state or by the federal government, you cannot lobby in your professional capacity, right? So like, let's say someone, I think like DFC, like Drug-Free Communities Grants funding, a lot of people mention they're in those positions. If your position is fully funded by DFC, you cannot lobby. You can advocate, right? Like you can educate legislators, you can raise awareness, but you cannot lobby and ask a legislator to support a specific piece of policy in your professional capacity, but you can do it as a constituent. Everybody can advocate and lobby as a constituent.
Okay.
And so that's sort of the restriction there. If you're 100% state or federally funded, you can lobby on your own time, just not in your professional capacity.
Thank you. This was really helpful. Sorry I had to miss a segment of it, but it was really helpful. Look forward to the recording too.
Yeah, thank you all for attending.
Did a great job.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Any other questions folks have? Like I said, I can stick around for a few more minutes. All right. Bye.